Two people live in the same house. Same mattress, same blackout curtains, same bedtime routine. One of them falls asleep before their head hits the pillow. The other lies there staring at the ceiling for 2 hours wondering what is wrong with them. Same environment, same lifestyle, completely different experience. And here's the part nobody tells you. The answer isn't in their bedroom, it's in their DNA. Your body runs on a clock. Not a metaphorical one, a literal biological clock ticking inside almost every cell in your body, coordinating when you feel alert, when you feel drowsy, when your temperature rises, when your hormones shift. Scientists call this your circadian rhythm, from the Latin meaning roughly 24 hours. And for most of human history, we assumed this clock was basically the same for everyone, just nudged around by light and habit. Then we started reading the genetic code more carefully. What we found changed everything. Your genes don't just influence what you look like or how tall you grow, they help set the timing of that internal clock. Specific sequences in your DNA act like the hands on a watch, influencing how fast your biological day runs, when certain hormones peak, and when your brain decides it's time to sleep. This is why some people have been night owls their entire lives, no matter how many times they tried to force themselves into an early schedule. It's not laziness. It's not a bad habit they picked up in college. It was written into them long before they ever saw the inside of a dorm room. This is where the concept of chronotype comes in. Your chronotype is essentially your genetic sleep personality. It describes whether your natural biological preference is to fall asleep early and wake early, fall asleep late and wake late, or land somewhere in the middle. Researchers have moved well beyond the casual morning person versus night owl conversation. Studies involving hundreds of thousands of people have identified hundreds of genetic variants that contribute to chronotype. And those variants don't care what time you set your alarm. They are operating underneath your conscious choices, pulling your biology toward a particular window of time. The genes doing most of this work have names that sound like something from a science fiction novel. Clock, PER1, PER2, PER3, CRY1, CRY2. These are called clock genes, and they function almost like a molecular feedback loop inside your cells. They switch each other on and off in a cycle, and the speed and timing of that cycle varies from person to person based on the specific versions of these genes they carry. A variation in CRY1, for example, has been directly linked to delayed sleep phase disorder, a condition where people feel a genuine biological pull towards sleeping hours later than what society considers normal. They're not choosing to stay up until 2 in the morning. Their cellular clock is simply running longer than 24 hours. Then there's melatonin. You've probably heard of it as the sleep hormone, but what's fascinating is that your DNA influences not just how much melatonin your brain produces, but when it starts producing it. The MTNR1B gene affects melatonin receptor function and has been tied to differences in when the body begins its nightly hormone release. For some people, that melatonin surge starts earlier in the evening. For others, it starts frustratingly late, which is why the idea of just going to bed earlier feels physically impossible when your biology hasn't received the signal yet. Now, here's the important distinction. Your DNA creates a predisposition, not a prison sentence. The genes that shape your sleep timing set a range, a gravitational pull toward certain patterns. But they are not destiny. Environment, light exposure, stress, age, and behavior all interact with your genetic baseline. A true extreme night owl might not be able to become a natural early riser, but they can understand why their clock runs differently and work with it instead of constantly fighting a losing battle against their own biology. That shift in perspective alone changes everything. Think about the experiences you might recognize. You go to bed at a reasonable hour and simply cannot fall asleep, lying awake for what feels like forever while your mind stays frustratingly alert. Or maybe you fall asleep just fine but wake up at 4 in the morning, wide awake, unable to get back to sleep no matter how tired you are. Or perhaps you function brilliantly in the evening hours but feel genuinely impaired before 9 in the morning, no matter how much coffee you drink. These aren't random inconveniences, they are your genetic clock talking. The person who can't fall asleep until midnight may carry variants that delay their biological night. The person who wakes at 4 may carry variants that push their circadian cycle earlier than the rest of the world. Both of them are experiencing something real, something measurable, something written into the very molecules that make them who they are. The color of your eyes gets traced back through thousands of years of ancestry. The timing of your sleep is written in that same code. Two people in identical circumstances can have radically different nights because their DNA is running two different clocks. Understanding that your sleep schedule isn't a personality flaw or a willpower problem, but a biological signature is the first step. And once you understand what your DNA is actually doing, the next question becomes what you can do about it. So now you know your sleep isn't a failure of discipline. It's a biological fingerprint, but knowing that doesn't automatically fix the 2 hours of ceiling staring. Here's what you can actually do with that information and what it's realistic to expect from it. Your DNA can tell you a surprising amount about your relationship with sleep. Research has connected specific genetic variants not just to chronotype, but to sleep quality, sleep duration preferences, and vulnerability to insomnia. Some people carry variants that make their sleep architecture more fragile, meaning they cycle through deep sleep and lighter stages in a way that leaves them more easily disrupted. Others have genetic profiles that make them particularly sensitive to sleep deprivation, feeling the cognitive effects much harder than someone else who lost the same number of hours. And some variants are linked to a higher baseline risk of clinical insomnia, not just the occasional bad night, but persistent difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep that doesn't resolve with better habits alone. If you've spent years wondering why sleep feels harder for you than it seems to be for everyone around you, there's a real chance the answer is sitting in your genetic code. But here is what your DNA cannot fully explain on its own: your environment. And this is where most people are quietly making things dramatically worse without realizing it. Your genetic clock evolved over thousands of years in a world without artificial light. Every evening your ancestors sat around a fire, the light shifted toward warmer, dimmer tones, and their biology took that as a cue to begin the hormonal cascade toward sleep. Now you're sitting under blue-tinted overhead lights at 9 at night, staring at a phone screen 3 inches from your face, and your brain is receiving a message that says, "It is noon." It doesn't matter what your genes are programmed to do. You are actively overriding the signal. If you already carry variants that delay your melatonin release, adding hours of artificial blue light in the evening isn't just unhelpful. It is compounding a genetic tendency into something far more disruptive than it needed to be. The same principle applies to irregular schedules. Your clock genes synchronize partly through consistency. If your wake time shifts by 2 or 3 hours depending on the day, you are constantly resetting a clock that was never designed to be reset that way. Add chronic stress, which elevates cortisol and directly suppresses melatonin production, and you have built the perfect conditions for a genetic predisposition to become a full-blown sleep disorder. Working with your chronotype instead of against it starts with timing, and timing starts with light. Morning light is one of the most powerful tools you have for anchoring your circadian rhythm. Getting outside within 30 to 60 minutes of waking, even on a cloudy day, sends a strong signal to your biological clock that synchronizes everything downstream. For night owls especially, this is not optional maintenance. It is one of the only reliable ways to gradually nudge a late-running clock toward a more functional schedule. In the evening, the goal reverses. Dimmer, warmer light after sunset. Screens with reduced blue light or glasses that filter it. A consistent wind-down window that your biology can start to recognize as a reliable signal. Consistency in your wake time, even on weekends, even when you feel terrible, gives your clock genes something stable to anchor to. Your sleep onset time will gradually follow. You may never become a natural early riser if your genetics pull hard toward the evening, but you can find the version of your schedule that creates the least friction with your biology and stop forcing something that was never going to work the way you were trying to do it. There is also a point where all the genetic awareness and habit optimization in the world is not enough. If you are experiencing persistent insomnia, sleep that leaves you exhausted regardless of duration, severe daytime impairment, or patterns like waking at the same time every night unable to return to sleep, those are signals worth bringing to a doctor. Sleep apnea, which has its own genetic components, is frequently underdiagnosed and is not something a morning light walk will fix. Restless leg syndrome, circadian rhythm disorders severe enough to require clinical intervention, and anxiety-driven insomnia all require evaluation beyond what any lifestyle adjustment can address. Understanding your genetics is context, not a substitute for medical care when something is genuinely wrong. On the subject of consumer DNA tests, manage your expectations. Services that include sleep-related genetic reports are giving you real information, but partial information. They are looking at a limited set of variants, not your entire genome, and sleep is influenced by hundreds of genes interacting with each other and with environmental factors in ways that no single report fully captures. Think of it as a useful starting point, not a diagnosis. If a test tells you that you carry a variant associated with later melatonin release, that is genuinely meaningful context, but it should prompt you to pay attention to your patterns and work with a professional if needed, not convince you that your destiny is written and fixed. Here is the takeaway. You have been fighting your biology with a schedule designed for someone else's genetics, under lighting conditions your ancestors never experienced, blaming yourself for the results. That stops now. Your sleep timing isn't a character flaw. It's a biological signature shaped over a lifetime. And it responds to the right inputs. Get the morning light. Protect your evenings. Stay consistent with your wake time. Give your clock genes the cues they were designed to respond to. Work with what you are, not against it. And if the problem runs deeper than habits can reach, get it evaluated. Your sleep is not a mystery. It just needs to be read correctly.